Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in the coach edition of the Copson Advantage series hosted by Game Plan. My name is Megan Donahue-Wise, and I'm the Game Plan Advisor at the Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic. A couple of housekeeping things just before we get started. So you are all muted for the duration of the presentation, and we ask that you continue to keep your microphones off during the session. If you have any questions for the presenters, you can put them in the Q&A, which you can find just down at the bottom of the screen. Your questions may remain anonymous if you wish using the Q&A function. And please note that you can upvote questions asked by other participants just to avoid duplication. So it is now my absolute pleasure to introduce our presenters for today. Danielle Poulos is a mental performance consultant who's been working with the Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic since 2016. And she also does significant work in the area of coach enhancement throughout the province of Nova Scotia. Jack Hanratty, sorry Jack, is head coach of Rugby Canada's U20 women's team and academy coach for the Atlantic region, as well as the head coach of Nova Scotia's senior men's and senior women's teams. So today they're going to be discussing coach wellness, and without a further ado, I'll pass it over to them. Danielle and Jack, take it away.
Hi everybody, thanks for joining us today. This is actually our first day back in the office, so we're coming to you live from the Canadian Sports Centre today. Very happy to be in here and getting to do this work with Jack in person. As Megan mentioned, I'm a mental performance consultant, but I've also worked as a coach for over 20 years. And I have Jack here with me. Jack's the national team coach for the U20 women's rugby and has done quite a bit of work in coach wellness as well.
Yeah, first of all, thanks everybody for logging on, which can only be described as your 140-second webinar, I'm sure, while this has all started. For me, this has been a really interesting topic to look at as a coach, to look at with your athletes, but to look in-house, I think, is a really important piece. A lot of what we do today is just kind of information from Danielle's professional opinion in terms of mental performance, but also just some little stories and caveats about what's been going on as we found as coaches. So I'm sure you all have some of that information yourselves, so it's just kind of telling the story from that actual coach's point of view as well.
So just to kind of as a warm up with the Menti, for those of you that haven't used Menti before, we're going to switch over to Menti real quick here. And just to kind of get an idea of who's here in attendance, if you could go to your menti.com and use your phones, because it makes it a lot easier for not having to switch screens and whatnot. So if you can pull out your phone, use your phone, type in www.menti.com. And then it'll ask you to put in the code, and the code is 812438. And just let us know where you're signing in from today, so we know kind of what our audience looks like. In addition, we'll be using this throughout our slides. I like to keep things as interactive as possible, so we'll be using this throughout the presentation. So just to kind of warm up and see how it works.
So the code once again is 812438, and you can see it on the top of your screen.
Yeah, this is quite a few from Ontario. Ontario taking an early lead. And you should be able to see this as well on your screen as people are putting in their responses. Okay. Yeah, Nova Scotia. Kind of expected a few more from.
I'm sure they're sick of us.
Yeah, that's true. All right, we'll go back over to the PowerPoint. And if you haven't gotten yours in, then still put them in, just because it's good to know for people to have record of who's coming into the webinar series. So just to kind of go over our goals for today, I first wanted to start off with kind of a definition of what wellness was. That's the button. So we hear the words well-being, wellness, mental wellness, physical wellness. Today, I wanted to kind of describe what we're using for wellness today, then go into a little bit of, well, not a little, mostly some self-reflection and self-awareness, and then get into some tools that you can use for improving coach wellness. And then finally, leave you with a little bit of resources as far as apps go for some wellness, some really great wellness apps that are out there right now. All right, so what do we mean by wellness? And sorry if I'm looking up, we have a big screen ahead of us, so it's not just, yeah, you're probably getting a lot of my neck. All right, what do we mean by wellness? What we're talking about today is physical, mental, and social well-being. Oftentimes you see people talk about physical wellness, or you see people talk about mental wellness, and they're really so intertwined that it doesn't always make sense to separate them, because a lot of the tools that we will talk about later on today have to do with the physical helping the mental, or the mental helping the physical. So to separate them doesn't really make sense. So we're trying to talk about kind of total wellness here. And the other important thing to note is that wellness does not mean the absence of disease or illness. So some wordy slides here. I promise you most of this won't be that wordy as far as slides go. I like to keep things nice and visual. So definitions around mental illness, health, and mental skills. So mental illness has to do with alterations in our thinking, our mood, or behavior, and it's associated with significant distress and impaired functioning. On the other end, mental health, which is our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. Once again, it's not the absence of mental illness, and sometimes you see things on a spectrum where mental health is on one side and mental illness is on the other side. That is not what we're saying here today. We're saying these are on two different spectrums. And mental health is actually necessary to sustain mental performance. So mental skills and mental performance, which is my particular area, that's using techniques with the purpose of enhancing sport performance, and they're just like our physical skills. So they take repetition, they take practice, and they take application in game type scenarios. So how these interact, and I thought this was good to show kind of how mental health and mental illness are on two different spectrums. So on the lower end, so poor mental health can lead to poor physical illness or mental illness. And it can also lead to poor physical performance. On the upper end, the higher mental health, we can see optimal mental health can occur with mental illness, but not without mental health. So if you look in the flourishing, you can have flourishing with mental illness, and you can have flourishing without mental illness. And that's basically where we see mental performance take place.
So when we have a look at our own daily training environment, think about the different deliverables that you have for yourself as a coach, you have for your staff, or you have for your athletes as well. And think about how that can be applicable to when we're talking about mental wellness. So let's take a little part of that. A really small example would be a little athlete check-in, something that we've been doing quite consistently probably over this COVID period. So some of those examples, how are you? And basically, what other questions would you ask? How are you feeling? Little things that we want to think about is, how did you do your check-in with your athletes? Where were you located when you're doing it? Was it a big loud place? Was it somewhere where you were sitting alone? And why did you check in? Was there something that actually triggered for that check-in to actually happen? So I'm going to use a little bit of imagery here, a little bit of example. Danielle uses all the words and I use all the pictures, it seems. So for instance, I want to just take you to that time where you've got your hands on a new car. So the bottom picture, when you have a new car, you don't talk about any of its flaws. You don't talk about the things that it's missing. You always say, look how great my car is, and it's almost a show off. So that's actually just trying to create this persona of somebody that's really happy and excited. But if you were going to bring that exact same car, no matter what period, to a mechanic, if a mechanic was thinking about ways to fix the car, you wouldn't exactly suggest all the fantastic things that the cars do. What you'd actually do is talk about the things that you are a little bit worried about. And think about that is in relation to your actual mental well-being. So what we want to have a look at is actually practicing what you preach. So if you have deliverables for your athlete, if you have deliverables for your staff, and if you do numerous check-ins with your staff and athletes, how often do you actually check in with yourself? Do you ask yourself these questions? How am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? And what are those little triggers, which we will get into as we go on?
So with that first question, I'm going to go back over to Menti. So grab your phones if you don't mind. Same code. So if you refresh, it should. Okay. It should refresh as far as the question goes. And once again, we're trying to keep things visual here. So it was great because Jack found some really great pictures of Winnie the Pooh, which has a lot of expressions. And we have some of the descriptors there under each Winnie the Pooh character. So looking at what character here, what adjectives best described you prior to COVID? So when you were, or thinking back to when you're in your full season, what describes you best, or who depicts you best out of these characters? Got lots of confident, social, great. And remember, we can't see who's answering what, or nobody can see that. So these are, I should have said that at the beginning, all the Menti questions are anonymous. So we won't be able to say anything to who responded to what. That's one of the great things about the Menti. Okay, so we see quite a bit high on the social and the confident, and basically on the coach wellness in general. So we're seeing high coach wellness in general with this population. So that's really nice to see. Not always the case. So it was nice to see, or not nice to see, but it's interesting to see how we did have some in the other areas. So impatient, irritable. And if we go to the next slide, yeah, so if we go to the next slide, this is where we took these adjectives from. This is the mental health continuum, as some of you, or most of you, have probably seen this. And this is the spectrum that actually does describe mental health from healthy to ill. And we took those out just simply because we want you guys to relate to those visuals and to some of these kind of key components to your state of being versus saying I'm ill versus I'm healthy. So just some things to pull from here: having consistent performance, normal sleep patterns. Sleep is really huge, obviously. When we get into that yellow area, we're seeing nervous, there's some trouble sleeping, lower, or feeling a little bit more tired, procrastinating. Some of these adjectives also help us to kind of really better identify where we land across the spectrum. Whereas we see anxiety, decreased performance, fatigue, aches and pains, and then on the lower end, which you can't see unfortunately that well in this particular slide, but we see depression, we see exhaustion, we see unable to perform, we see absenteeism. So once again, with that said, with those two descriptors out there, if you were to see a coach that you felt was struggling with their health, with their total wellness, how would you describe them? What does low coach wellness look like to you? Or what can you identify within yourself as low coach wellness for now? Lots of withdrawn, yeah. Tired. unprepared. Very interesting.
A lot of similar words coming up: unmotivated, disinterested, a lower engagement. These all seem to be quite consistent across the board.
Yeah, lots of tired and fatigue, irritable and frustrated. Great. Sleepless nights, scattered. Yeah, great. Tired being still the number one there, but irritable and angry obviously are coming up quite a bit. The way this slide works, or the way this Menti works, is that the ones that are most frequently put in are the bigger words.
Interesting there to say that just slow and late were kind of ones that come out for me. Is if you have a coach who realistically is never late to something, and suddenly you've noticed them being a little bit disengaged, and suddenly that they are being late, they're not taking as much of a pride in their appearance or pride in actually just being on time for things. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. So definitely heard a lot of the things that, that we would, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those down the road, but one thing to really remember here, and I like this analogy, is, and I'm sure some of you guys have heard about it before, and you certainly have heard it if you've taken any kind of plane ride, not anytime recently, obviously, but to fit your own oxygen masks first, because you're going to be of no use if you're passed out. You're going to be of no use if you're burnt out. So it's important that you're looking after yourself to certainly some level in order to be the best coach that you can be, in order to perform. So considering yourself just like you would consider your athletes. Your athletes aren't going to perform their best if their mental health is low. And just like you will not perform your best as a coach if your mental health is low. So this is some of the things that research has shown that, and you would all know this just from experience, that really impact our mental health. And these are real things that impact the profession of coaching. We know that we have different schedules. Our schedules are from, evenings and weekends, whereas the majority of people are working 9 to 5. Our travel, we're gone for long periods of time for competition or for training camps, and which leads to time away from loved ones. We also have a really high pressure to perform, or high expectations on our performance. Job stability. Oftentimes coaches do not have contracts beyond a quadrennial, and that's on the good end. Most coaches have a year to year. So our job stability is very at risk. And then the fear of being judged or labeled in seeking help, to help promote their mental health. Yeah, schedule and hours, definitely. It's interesting how the schedule and hours is the number one, and job stability actually is their 5th on the list. Interesting. And the limited support being 2nd. Great. Sorry. So research shows that coaching in particular, we actually see higher levels of divorce rates with coaches, mainly because of some of these things, the schedule and the hours, the travel, the time away from the family and friends, which can put a strain on our relationships. And that limited support, or that feeling that no one really knows what we're going through because we're not maybe our partner isn't a coach themselves. So that feeling of having to do these hours, and that creates that feeling of loneliness. So that limited support impacts the loneliness, the strain on the relationships, and it's just kind of a vicious cycle. And then we also have, like we said, the pressure to perform and our job stability and the fear of being judged in going out and getting help with your mental health. And so on the very end of the spectrum, so what would be the major risk in low self-care or extreme low mental health? What is something that you would fear happening to yourself if you went down that path of low mental health? What would be the end of that path? And we'll get you to put that in once again, using Menti. Quitting sport, breakdown, burnout, quitting, yeah. Yeah, it's not a pretty picture when we don't take care of ourselves in some way. So we're seeing obviously burnt out, and we'll talk about that because that is the risk of low self-care as far as coaching goes, but we're seeing a lot of larger risks. So beyond just coaching, what happens? So instability, actual physical illness, and loss of friends, feeling resentful, suicide. We've seen a few times here. And yes, that's definitely burnt out and depressed. So what we see on the low end of self-care, if we go to our next slide here, yeah, risk of low self-care is burnout, and burnout can look different for different people. Exhaustion, and we saw that a lot when we were talking about some of the low self-care, or sorry, some of the low wellness, what low wellness looked like. So feeling completely depleted or overwhelmed or overextended. And then there's that depersonalization where we get really cynical and detached or unmotivated. And then there's the reduced accomplishment, or that feeling of not being valued, or what we're doing. We don't have that same value in what we're doing. And then we become ineffective. So what we see as far as statistics go with coaches have mental illness and burnout and ill well-being just as much as athletes do. They're no different than the average population. So on the other end of things, though, when we see coaches that have higher levels of well-being, they're actually more likely to create positive environments for their athletes. And we know that positive environments for your athletes lead to better performance, and usually a better performance leads to better results. So let's kind of look on the other end of things. What does coach wellness look like?
I think one thing we've always noticed from a lot of these mental wellness sessions when we have a look at, we always do appreciate the bad things that go on and those abilities. So it's also a big thing for us to actually have a look at to see, well, what does actually, if somebody is well, if somebody is, you can see is their well-being is very good at the moment, what does that look like? So some of the things that we're getting, happy, engaged, positive, energetic, enthusiastic, maybe somebody that does exercise on a regular basis, be it in your daily training environment or be it in competition, they're sleeping well, high productivity is always a good one too, and obviously a balance is a big one there. Fun, love to see that. Drive. It was great to see how quickly people could list off what healthy coach wellness was as well, because sometimes when all of the negative pieces written up and some of those things that we need to look out for, that's always a tough thing to actually type and to list, and it's a tough thing to read. So being able to have a look at this of committed people, motivated people, energy, exercise, resilience, that's always some fantastic positive words. And don't forget to appreciate when you're showing these, because sometimes you can always know when you're not showing them, but actually ticking a box and say, oh, I did show that today in my training session. So here's a look at a little bit of what you could circle are some good traits of coach wellness. So being physically active, is it someone that actually shows their way being grateful, that they're understanding, be it in a staff, be it at home, be it with your athletes, that they have a tolerance. A higher tolerance would be a great way, and something that maybe we didn't mention in the Mentimeter a minute ago. Are they tolerant? Do they have control? Are they in control of the environment, in control of the training session? Or if something doesn't go well in a game or in a training session, are they still managing to be in control? And having a connection with others, be it people inside or outside of the sport itself. I think one of the things we can forget about is actually having a bit of a sense of humor. There's also currently with, I'm sure, all the webinars that we've seen, there's always things that you're going to change your coaching with. But we don't want to become that cookie cutter coach. We still want to have our own persona and our own personality. And by you having an ability to have a sense of humor, again, in your environment, in your daily training environment, with your IST, with your athletes, is always a great way of showing coach wellness. So have a little look, think about different examples of that for yourself.
So some of the benefits that we see when we do take better care of ourselves is we actually devote more time to training and instruction. We're more patient. So going back to what Jack just said, we're more tolerant and we have more clarity. Our problem-solving brain actually works better. So we have a fairer democratic approach. We are able to take in more concerns. We have more understanding for people. We have more empathy. And as a result, we're more effective in our communication. We have more energy, so that feeling of tiredness, and I think some other people wrote that they're energetic for planning and ongoing reflection, or even for learning. We have better engagement and focus, and we develop better coach-athlete relationships in this type of state. And generally, we're just more motivated, and we enjoy our profession a lot more. And kind of that feeling of control, that's where we have the self-efficacy. So we feel in control, we feel confident of what we're doing. And so all of these are kind of the why behind why it is important to take the time for self-care and to work on your mental and physical health. Because all of these obviously point to one thing, and that's better performance. So that's better performance from you, and we know that a better coach-athlete relationship is going to lead to most likely better performance from your athletes as well. Yeah, I guess my slides are kind of wordy, aren't they? So, coach, how to improve coach wellness? So throwing that out to you guys, because if you have taken the time to reflect on this, especially during this COVID period, where a lot of people have limited things to do other than some really good self-reflection. What do you do, or what did you do, or what might you do moving forward to improve your overall wellness? Prioritize exercise. Yeah, very big. Oh, good.
Take time for me and slow down. Connect with other coaches, probably a massive one. There's been no other time in the history of high performance sport where people have been able to sit down with other coaches. A lot of exercise, setting boundaries. It's good to see. Taking an hour at a time, open communication, take wellness classes. That's certainly going to the other extreme, which is great. Make sure to take breaks and vacation. Yeah, how many coaches have we seen that, although haven't been able to look in with their athletes, that suddenly they're on Zooms every 4 minutes. So yeah, taking time as well. Care only about what matters. So maybe prioritizing.
Meditation, visualization.
Get my NCC points. Great job.
Yeah, there you go. Run a fun practice. Yeah, designate a week a night a week to socialize. Yep. Yeah, so actually have designated days for certain things. That's great. See a therapist. Wonderful. Taking things day by day, creating moments outside of your sport, very important. Checking in with others or with supporters, knowing who those people that help to invigorate you and inspire you, and knowing some of those people who are in your support group or who are in your close circle of family and friends that sometimes you need a certain level of energy to be around for some time. So knowing who are your energy suckers and who are your energy givers.
I think creating the why, as we've spoken about quite a lot, you always find out from your athletes why they're training, what their aim is as an athlete. But what's the why for you? What is your coaching philosophy, and what gives you that energy, that gives you that excitement that you always like in your profession or in your coaching?
Take breaks more. Yeah, great. So what can you do? And you guys have enumerated basically a lot of what we're going to talk about today, and you obviously know yourselves best. So the primary thing that we wanted to get out of today and in the goals was the awareness, because if we don't have an awareness of where we're at personally as a coach, of what drains us, of what we look like when we're drained and we have low coach wellness, or we don't even know what we look like when we're on the higher end. If we don't have an understanding of that, we can't fix it. So the important part of this today is to start to really dig deep around your awareness. And then, just like any good coach, you could create game plans. So just like you would plan different scenarios for certain teams or in certain types of competitive daily training environment or certain type of competition, that you would create a game plan around that. The same thing can be done. Once we know what we're dealing with, we can create a game plan for that. Then creating some checklists, and so making sure that that's a daily priority. And then creating challenges. We know that coaches or people in sport are competitive people, and sometimes challenges help to bring out that competitiveness, and that's all that's really needed in order to make it more of a lifestyle change. So yeah, the first one being kind of around that awareness. And Jack, I think you had talked about how you gained that awareness yourself.
Yeah, I think to go on your last point of we create game plans for certain opposition, for certain scenarios, for certain even for certain weather or tracks, depending on your field of sport. So when we do create that plan of attack or those KPIs for that, why don't we look at that ourselves? And I think then going back to the awareness, how are we aware? Like, for instance, if you're getting particularly frustrated at certain players, at your staff, or even at officials or the referees, taking actually an insular look to say, well, is that because of how I'm feeling? Or is it because of actually what someone else did? And just being able to take a step back and to evaluate and to understand the awareness around that piece. Also, have you checked in with your athletes to say, listen, how am I doing? Has an athlete come to you to say, hey, you've been quite negative, and suddenly a lot of that arises through pressure. So if results haven't been going your way, or if athletes haven't been performing, just taking a step back, checking those boxes. Have you been keeping in your checklist for a mental health, wellness, or a positive mental lifestyle?
Yeah, again, going back to that awareness. So it's not just an awareness of when our battery is completely depleted. We definitely need to know that, but we don't want to get there very often. Sometimes it's important to have gotten there at some point because we learn from that situation. But it's also important to know, where are we at 25%? What does that look like? Where am I when I'm at 50%? Where am I when I'm at 100%? And almost, what does this mean to my ability to coach at that high level? The other important thing around the awareness here, in going from that depleted to that full, or even from the 50 to the 75, or the 75 to the 100, what do I need to do to get me from one point to the next. So if I'm at 50% and I haven't exercised in a couple days, I know right away that I need to incorporate that exercise routine, even if it's 20 minutes a day, back into my routine, because I'm starting to feel depleted. Or that, making a goal around my sleep, that I'm getting a certain amount of sleep, that I'm going to bed at a certain time and waking up at a certain time, as much as that is within my control. So that I'm looking at some of those things that I can control and that I can incorporate, and knowing what that means for 50%, what that means for 75%, and how to take that, how to incorporate it so that I can get up to those higher levels of feeling completely well.
And think about that opportunity as here you've clearly got a phone battery or laptop battery. When you see 75%, you're never quite worried. But if suddenly you've forgotten your charger, or suddenly you're going somewhere where there's no electricity, you have a little bit more worry. So about, as coaches, so much time is put into planning of every day and of every week, in competition or out of competition. One of the things that we need to look at is actually seeing what's inevitable. Will I get a time to actually put an hour aside for myself? Or should I maybe do a little bit more now? So should I exercise a little bit more now? Because I know I'm not going to have to do it, even though I'm feeling quite healthy. But what do I need? I think another really great point that Daniela said as well is you learn from being in the red. So when we as coaches, when we are away at competition, and if we've had some sort of failure or some sort of loss, we always learn from that. And I think seeing every webinar over the last few months, you always see from some of the most world-class coaches around, everyone has said, I really learned the hard way, or I learned from all those times. Well, it's exactly the same with an issue like this. I'm certainly not a professional in any regards to my qualifications with this, but the thing that I've certainly taken a lot of pride in is just identifying whether I'm in the red, the yellow, or the green, and what I need to be as high a percentage as I can. So here's what has come out in terms of COVID-19. There's always been a lot of tips for mental health. The reason why a lot of these tips have been brought out is because everyone knew that this is going to get a bit strange, and it was strange to begin with, but we also knew that it was going to be a long time not doing what our normal is. So have a look at maybe some of those things that you checked in with. What was something that you needed to do in COVID-19, or be it at home with your family or your partner, or even living alone, which again, every single part of that offers different stresses. So that might be being mindful and doing some yoga, or limiting the news, because for quite a long time there wasn't a lot of positive news to go on to have a look at. Are you just in a mindset of just surviving, or are you striking a balance? And are you sitting with your emotions? So being present about how you're actually feeling. The reason why we've shown this is because we're currently not out of COVID-19, although it's great to be in the office talking to somebody different today. We're still in this phase. But if you have made a big effort in one of these, what are you going to keep? What's the ability to keep something? If you could see yourself just at the start of COVID-19, being self-aware of where you were. Where was I? How was I feeling? And what did I need to change? Well, if we can have a look, if it's something as simple for myself, it was a big thing of setting a daily schedule. Well, that also needs to improve when we do come back to some daily training environment. Am I able to set a consistent schedule where I am aware of making a little bit of time for self-care, a little bit of time for connecting with other people, or even a little bit of time for just being active and staying healthy? So think about the thing that you might keep from what's gone on over the last few months. And then, of course, there's actually setting a bit of a checklist. So you are the only person that will know, and well, maybe you could ask your coaches or your athletes, or even your partner, or somebody that you're in close communication with. What are the things that I'm at my best? And being able to be aware with that. Do you need to be outside every little while? Do you need to get exercise every day, or something simple like just seeing other people? Is that part of your checklist? So why not creating a bit of a checklist to say, these are the things that I know puts me and my mental wellness best?
And just to that point, that it's part of your actually, if you have a daily planner, if you have it on your phone, that it's actually part of it on your phone, or that it is written down. So you have an actual scheduled time. And I saw a lot of you had actually written that in the original, the Coach Wellness, how do you increase it? A lot of you are doing that, but that is really key. So it's actually sectioning off times for some of these things. So whether it is exercise, whether it is making a meal that you're really excited to eat or you enjoy cooking, whether it is, taking an hour to read a book, that those are actually scheduled into your planner, just like your day-to-day activities are with your coaching role.
And if you need to be that competitive person, the first thing that we've done when coming into the center is we've all been doing our check-in, and we've been doing our temperature, and suddenly all of us that have been coming into the center today, this is instantly a competition. Does mine need to be higher or lower? Like, who wins here? If that's something that's important to you, which we're all involved in sport, so there's definitely some sort of competitiveness. So do you need that competitive piece? Well, that might be finding a buddy on your Apple Watch to track your activity, or doing a step challenge with somebody else. I think one of the recent things that I've been involved in is the Whole Life Challenge, and being able to see that. And that to me was going after being competitive on a daily basis for a number of things. It was sleep, nutrition, activity, and sometimes some even just switch off from communication. That to me was, although it was fantastic for my lifestyle, it was more fantastic for me because I was getting to be competitive against other people. And that's the tick that I need on my checklist is being competitive. So what are the ticks that you need in yours? Because realistically, what sort of challenges do you want? What would be effective, so that we can go into this lead of making sure that wellness is a bit of a lifestyle? So what can we take from the last few months, or what can we change from before COVID-19 hit us all and affected us all? And what can we change to make sure that wellness is actually a lifestyle?
Yeah, because they can start off as challenges, and once again, being coaches and being involved in sport, we do love that competitiveness, and there's lots of stuff out there, but creating them, having that group to compete with, whether, like Jack said, whether it's your athletes, whether it's your buddies, that it's people that you can create that with, and then you get that sense of competitiveness, because sometimes that's all it takes to make it part of your daily routine. And once it's part of your daily routine for a certain period of time, we see it become a habit, and then it just becomes a lifestyle rather than a challenge. So these are some of the resources that are out there. Some are free, some are not. Headspace, great one. All of these are really good. They're all for slightly different things. Obviously, Headspace, really great for meditation, and for exercises around being present, and some breathing exercises as well. Calm, more for relaxation. Shine, it's one of those ones where there's actual challenges that take place. So Shine, Healthy Minds, and Well Track, those are all ones that incorporate some form of challenge, where Headspace and Calm, you would have to create a challenge around some of those. Perhaps like you've used Headspace for 20 minutes a day, or you've used Calm for 20 minutes a day. Whereas Shine, the little brain there is Healthy Minds, and then Well Track. Those are apps that you can use. I believe Well Track and Healthy Minds have a price with them. But that those are used to actually create challenges amongst other people. But just to Jack's point, for those that use Fitbits or that use Apple iWatch, that there's other things that you can use to create competition around breathing, using meditation on a daily basis, around how much you're moving, how much you're exercising, and even some around how much you're sleeping. So that concludes our presentation on Coach Wellness. But wanted to throw it out there to all of you if you had any specific questions, or if you wanted us to go back to touch on anything further. The floor is open.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Danielle and Jack. So we do have one question that popped up in the Q&A function, and to the rest of you, if you've got some questions, I'll encourage you just to pop them into the Q&A function and we kind of go through them. as they come up. But the question that we have in there right now, so is it better to pretend to have or show coach wellness characteristics in a professional environment to try and create a better environment for your athletes, even if you don't feel those things on the inside? Or is it better just being who you are and showing what you're feeling?
It's better to be vulnerable, better to show, obviously to a certain extent, but also to show what the steps you are taking in order to increase that. But definitely it's important to show vulnerability, but that level of trust definitely needs to be there in the first place.
I think a big thing is knowing the difference between your mental wellness and just being disappointed, and because suddenly after a huge loss, in terms of you phone home and tell them that the game didn't go as well, and suddenly you're not getting the rub on the shoulder, the pat on the back that you were expecting, and that can be a little bit frustrating. So just making sure that you take time to just decompress, understand, and then write those things down. Well, did I get enough of these things? Because you might have had a great week and you're just disappointed. So some of those things where you'll need to show and you'll need to get your players excited about certain things after a difficult loss, and that's one thing. But then of course with this piece, totally agree with the vulnerability, because I think a lot of this and some of the great feedback that over COVID-19 is what from professionals, and big feedback was to the coaches: don't give a date of returning when it's not official. Like, don't give this false sense, rather than saying, yeah, listen, I agree, this is terrible. Like, this isn't a great environment, but we're all in it together and hopefully we can get through. And I think that's certainly something that will be is good to go forward.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Great question. Great answers. We just had another one pop up. So it says, how much time does it take to exercise the full body?
I believe the recommended amount is at least 20 minutes a day. I know that's what my iWatch tells me. I don't get my full circle if I don't do 20 minutes of exercise a day. And that's heart rate over, I believe, 130.
And I think that's a very individual thing as well. I mean, like, for me, I certainly was in a great place of being active before COVID-19, and suddenly I'm starting to build it up as well. So it's certainly like that is, how well you feel. If you go out for a 10-minute walk, it might be great for you individually. But if you go out and you've been doing this for a long time, well then going an hour and above, that might be the place where it sits well with you.
It definitely, to at least get into it, you should be looking at 20 minutes a day. So I see Jonathan there. Definitely, I agree. 60 minutes a day. That's personally what I aim for every day. But yeah, you want to at least start with 20 minutes. 60 minutes a day might seem overwhelming for someone that isn't doing anything at the current time.
Great. So another one just popped up. This is a great one. So how can we talk to our boards about making this a priority for our coaches? What are some good, tangible starting points?
That's a really good question, and something that hopefully, this definitely does need to infiltrate the entire sports system and beyond. And I think this period of almost pause during COVID has helped people reflect on that. One thing that I would recommend is education. Education. Like, you can't expect any change if people don't have that awareness component. So the education around the why this is important and how there is going to be higher productivity levels or better performance if this is something that is valued and that people put and invest time into. So it would be taking information, putting it together, and presenting it to a board, and as far as an education session. But definitely worthwhile doing, because those are the decision makers, and it's very important that those decision makers are putting value to this. Yeah,
a lot of us also we respond and we report to boards who are volunteers, so they go to work and they're almost switch off. Their mental wellness piece is being involved in their sport, which is a hard thing for people to kind of balance. So for me, I think a really simple thing was I did my checklist of how I feel, what I need to do during the week to feel at my best, and presented it to the board. Didn't do anything else. And what I could do on a regular basis was show the ticks that I had time to do. And sometimes when I was reflecting before giving it to the board, I could say, well, I didn't make that a priority, so there's no point me really asking the board for more time. But it's a great way for a group of volunteers to see it, is just being able to receive that information of, hey, this is what I had time, what I didn't have time to do. Because realistically, people in sport, it's not just a 9 to 5. We understand that. So the first thing that we understand is that, we won't be able to go for a run every single morning or every single night or over a certain weekend. But it's just fitting it in and just creating that priority list and presenting it back to the board, I think, is a really easy thing that we can do.
Great, solid points. So a question which may also be potentially a suggestion. Do you guys play chess?
Not for a long time. Does somebody want to play chess with us? That'd be really interesting.
You can get an online game going.
Okay.
And we've got one more here. So is it good to, when feasible, actually join in with your athletes? So a yoga session, that is lead by example, or maybe share what you're doing with your athletes during COVID.
Oh, I would highly recommend that. Getting down to the level of your athletes is important to do on a regular basis as a coach, period. And I know that as a coach, I definitely incorporated that on a weekly basis to be doing some form. And it actually was usually yoga. So I would always do the yoga class with the athletes. And I felt that was great because one, they saw me doing a physical activity, and that was kind of fun for them because sometimes I was struggling and they weren't, or sometimes it was fun for me because I wasn't struggling and they were. But it helps create that athlete coach bond for sure. And I would definitely, great question. Very important to do. Yeah,
my yoga ability will give most of my athletes a bit of a laugh. That's why I think, sense of humor is so important. So I would always throw it in there. I think one of the other things is joining in by setting goals. So like being pretty simple, like with a great thing that we've been doing is checking in via WhatsApp or via Zoom and just being able to say, hey, this is what I did for myself as a coach this week. Yeah, I've set a goal this month that I'm going to run this amount of kilometers, and suddenly your athletes look at it and say, well, they're not okay. That's something that they're doing personally, or that's something that they are doing for their mental well-being. I think that's the big thing. Is yes, showing vulnerability when we aren't feeling great, but also showing when you are feeling great and the reasons why, because then you're practicing some of the best parts of what we've listed today.
Awesome. So I think that's it for the questions, but I do see a comment in the chat that I just would like to put to you guys to address. So Teresa says that this year, because of extended time off with training already due to COVID, the club doesn't want to take the usual break. She's had a 3-week holiday from coaching for a few years, but have never taken all of it because of not wanting to miss the athletes' training. Concerned that with no break in the season this year, she will not be able to take a break. She's not good at taking breaks. And I think that this is probably a common thing that I know I hear from a lot of coaches. So do either of you have maybe some advice or something to speak to there?
For me, I think it's showing the reason of why you actually put the break in the first place. So just doing a little bit of research of, hey, this is why we dropped a break in at this time, and these are the reasons why. One of the things that I've been pretty happy about looking at my sport in terms of rugby around the world is they're not shoving although some are starting to restart, they're not demanding that every game is being played. They want to keep the quality up. And I think that's a great point that you can bring to your club or to your organization. Say, yeah, we understand that this is a very strange year. We want to do everything we'd love to, but is that going to be the best case scenario for our coaches, for our athletes, and for the actual standard of competition? Once you mention the standard of competition dropping, suddenly people really take notice. And I think that's a really easy thing that you can share. Might take a bit of research, but certainly an easy thing that you can go after.
Yeah, to Jeff's point, definitely, once again, presenting that back to the board and talking about, once again, the education component is really important there, Teresa, and knowing how to maintain a certain level of wellness in your preseason and throughout your season. And so what does that look like if not having those weeks of break are within your control? So if that's something that can't be changed, hopefully it is something that you can can talk with the board with, or with your employer with, on creating that opportunity to get those weeks, because that would be that's necessary, and I believe that's legally something that you should have access to with getting that vacation. However, if that isn't something that that is 100% within your control, finding a way to take mental breaks and physical breaks throughout your season. Where are the lulls? Where can you take a day or 2 days to yourself to help recharge that battery?
I think being really conscious as well about when you are allowed first back on that field, or in the gym, or in the pool, what's going to happen is you're excited as a coach, we're excited as a staff, the athletes are really excited, and you can overdo that, and suddenly we're in this false sense of security of being re-energized, being ready to go. But that can also lead to a quick burnout. So just being, engaging in this excitement, but not overdoing it, I think would be a big thing for all of us going forward.
I think one of the analogies that I like to take, and this goes for the mental side as well, when sports starts back up, we as coaches and as athletes, we want to go from 0 to 100. Like that's we're back in. Yeah, we can finally play. And what happens when that happens is people get injured physically. But the same thing if we want to put it back on the mental side, if we're going 0 to 100 mentally and jumping right back into sport and having these expectations way up here to start back where we left off, that's not a realistic expectation. And just like Jack said, that's going to lead to burnout big time.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, you guys. Great questions, great answers, great presentation. So huge thank you to Jack and Danielle. And just on behalf of the COPSI Network and Game Plan, a big thank you to all of our attendees and for taking part in the coach edition of our Advantage series. So that's it for us today. Thank you, everyone. We hope to see you next time.